Today, I am breaking down the best strategy and advice to help you win your fantasy hockey leagues, and I can guarantee you that this video will help you gain a massive edge against your competition. I'm going to be giving you the secrets that I've learned over the last couple of years to help you win your drafts, and specifically gain an edge on certain platforms like Yahoo. This will help you in your best ball drafts, but it will especially help in your casual redraft leagues with your friends and family that don't know too much about fantasy hockey. Even understanding the simple fundamentals will help you dominate those leagues. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. The most important thing that you want to do is hit that subscribe button below, guys. I know you thought I was going to start the video, but let me tell you something. 75% of the people that have watched my videos in the past 28 days are not subscribed. It's simple, guys. You just hit the subscribe button. It's going to help the channel. I'm giving out this content for free, and I would really appreciate it. So make sure you guys do that. Now that we have that out of the way, the actual most important thing for winning your fantasy hockey leagues is understanding your league settings. League settings can drastically change which players are more valuable than others, so you're going to want to know this going into your draft. Let me give you a few examples. If you're looking at Yahoo default scoring, you can see that saves matter quite a bit when we're talking about goalies. In fact, UC Saros has been the best fantasy goalie if we're talking about total fantasy points in the last 2 seasons. Saros led the league in saves last season and was second in saves the year prior. He plays a lot of games, but the Nashville Predators also let a lot of shots against, meaning Saros has a lot of value in your points leagues. If we compare UC Saros to Igor Shesterkin last season, it's a pretty interesting picture. Saros, like I said, was the best goalie overall if we're talking about total fantasy points, and Shesterkin was 8th. Obviously, some people have concerns about Nashville, which I completely understand, but if we're looking at Yahoo ADP, it's completely flipped from last year's total fantasy points. Shesterkin is the first goalie off the board, and Saros is 8th. This doesn't make a lot of sense. I will say that Yahoo ADP does reflect a wide variety of league settings, which is why Saros might be going lower. However, if you're in a points league that values saves, your league mates are going to see Saros as the 8th goalie off the board when he should be going as a top 5 goalie, and you can get him at a great value. Let me give you another example, but this time involving shots. If you're in a points league that heavily values shots like Yahoo default does, then players like Robert Thomas are not going to be valuable. If you compare Robert Thomas to Mikael Backlund, you would probably say to yourself, yeah, Robert Thomas has more value than Backlund for sure. He's on the first line, he's a younger player, he puts up 65 plus points every season, but that might not be the case depending on your league settings. If we're using Yahoo default scoring and we're comparing the average fantasy points per game last year between Thomas and Backlund, Backlund was clearly better. And guys, it's not even close, and that is despite Thomas putting up 9 more points than him last season. The reason for this is pretty simple. Thomas only had 106 shots last year versus Backlund's 260. That is a massive difference. Understanding this will help you avoid certain players like Robert Thomas or Andrei Kuzmenko, guys who don't put up a lot of shots that unfortunately are at a massive disadvantage in certain leagues. Here's another example using the scoring settings for one of the biggest best ball tournaments in the world. These settings count hits, and if you count hits in a points league, then certain players are going to have much more value over others. Scheifele had 20 more goals than Vincent Trocheck last year, yet according to these settings, Vincent Trocheck averaged more fantasy points per game than him. This is because Trocheck is one of the best players when it comes to hits, and Mark Scheifele is pretty average in that department. And yet, despite this being the case, Trocheck goes 50 picks later than Scheifele in that draft. The moral of the story is pay attention to your league settings. It's going to give you such a huge edge against your competition, and let me show you 2 tools that helps you do this. The first tool that's really going to help you is projections. There's a bunch of different content creators that release their own projections and spreadsheets that allow you to input your league settings, and it ranks players based off your own league settings. You'll be able to see which players are overvalued and undervalued, and that's really going to help. A few examples of these are Dom from The Athletic. That is paid, but it is pretty good. There's different ones that are free like Fresh Sheets or Chrome Aggregate. You can find those on the Fantasy Hockey Reddit. Apples and Genos have one, Daily Faceoff, Fantasy Puck. There's a bunch of different ones out there that you can find on the Fantasy Hockey Reddit, and those are useful, so make sure you check those out. I will say that even though I'm a fan of projections, they do have their flaws. The reason that they have flaws is because if you're comparing all these different projections, they can look wildly different from each other. For that reason, my go-to method to winning my fantasy hockey drafts is not so much looking at projections, but looking at fantasy points per game from last season. In my opinion, looking at fantasy points per game from the last season, according to your league settings, it's going to help you identify those players that are undervalued or overvalued in drafts. I will say that on certain platforms, you're able to see average fantasy points per game while you're drafting. This is great. It's super useful. Unfortunately, the most popular platform to draft on, which is Yahoo, does not have this feature. All you got to do is create a free Fantrax account. You click on NHL under season-long games, you choose commissioner, then you choose Fantrax default setup, you choose your league type, and then you enter your basic settings like your name, your team name, etc., and then you click submit. Once you've created your league in the sidebar, click on commissioner and then league setup. Once you're on league setup, you click scoring, and then you can customize it to your liking. There you'll be able to enter the value of each scoring setting, and once you've done that, you click on draft room. It will take you back to here. Once you're back here in your league, all you got to do is click rank players. There you'll see a ranking of players. You can sort by total fantasy points per game, or ADP. Right now you're only looking at projections, so what I want to do is go to 2022-2023 regular season. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to sort by fantasy points per game. Now I wouldn't necessarily do this for goalies because volume matters more, so I'd probably sort by total fantasy points for goalies, but if you want to click forwards or defensemen, you can see fantasy points per game according to your league settings. Using this enabled me to compare the players earlier on in this video, so make sure you do this, especially if you're drafting on Yahoo, and it's going to give you a massive edge. Moving on, guys, I want to talk about Yahoo because I think it's the easiest platform to gain an edge when we're talking about fantasy hockey. There are a variety of reasons why this is the case, so let's break it down. The first reason you can gain a massive edge when drafting on Yahoo is because of the way they rank players. When you enter a Yahoo draft, the first thing that they rank by is expert preseason rankings. These are complete garbage, and the reason for this is because they don't account for your league settings. There's two other things that you can rank by. One is rank, and that is actually based on your league settings, but again, these are projections, so they could look wildly different depending on what you're looking at. The next ranking is by ADP, and this is useful to understand where players go, but it's also not useful at all because the Yahoo ADP is so bad. This is mostly because you have these mock drafts going on every 5 minutes, and most of them are done by computer, so the ADP is all out of whack. Compared to an ADP on a platform like Drafters Fantasy Sports, use promo code FIREDUP, that's actually a paid league, right? You have to pay money to do these drafts. The ADP is going to be way smarter on that type of platform and way more accurate than a platform like Yahoo. You also have ADP influenced by a wide variety of different league settings. Some leagues are category leagues, some leagues are points leagues, some leagues count hits, some leagues don't count hits, and this is a massive problem if you're looking and sorting by ADP. The truth is, all of these ways to rank kind of suck, so I would say the X rank is probably the worst because it doesn't take into account your league settings. However, you face a massive dilemma if you're in a casual redraft league. Most of your league mates are probably sorting by X rank because that's what it's automatically sorted as. So if you make the decision to sort by rank or ADP, it's not going to help you understand how your league mates are going to draft. Sure, I can see that Joel Eriksson-Ek is ranked way higher in rank than X rank, but it doesn't help if I take him in the 8th round when I can get him in the 14th. So overall, guys, there's two solutions. My number one recommended solution is either using a projection spreadsheet and bringing that to your draft, or making your own custom rankings using fantasy points per game from last season. What you're going to want to do is look at Yahoo ADP and find which players are going way later in drafts that are higher in your rankings according to your league settings. Circle those players, identify those players, target them in your drafts, and that's how you're going to win. You can queue up those players when you enter your draft, so make sure like a day or two before your draft, identify those players. Because the Yahoo ADP is so out of whack, you'll be able to find undervalued players and steal them in your drafts, and that's the key to winning. However, if you don't want to do any of that and you just want to draft on Yahoo without anything to help you, what I suggest doing is keep sorting by X rank. That's going to help you understand where players are going to go in drafts, how your league mates are going to draft, but focus on rank. You'll be able to find guys that have an X rank of 30, but their ranking according to your league settings is like 80. So you're going to want to avoid players like that, and you'll be able to find steals as well. So overall, guys, I would highly recommend option number one. Bring your own custom rankings to your drafts, whether it's projections or it's fantasy points per game from last season. This is going to help you immensely, and I guarantee it's going to help you win your fantasy hockey drafts. All right, guys, let's talk about Drafters Fantasy Sports for a little bit. If you don't know this platform, basically it's a new type of drafting for fantasy hockey. It's called Best Ball, and there's no roster management, no ads, no drops, no trades. All you do is draft and see how your players do throughout the season. Drafters will automatically put your highest scoring player into the roster spots every night. Every night there's 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, 1 goalie, and 2 flex. Flex means either a forward or defenseman into that spot, and whoever has the most cumulative fantasy points at the end of the season wins $2,000. It's $11 to buy in, and there's prizes for the top 200 teams. Right now for this contest, there's 1,000 entrants. There's 600 people in it now. It's filling up, so make sure you sign up using referral code FIREDUP. When you deposit a minimum of $20 using promo code FIREDUP, they will match it 100% up to $100. This is the best promo on there currently, I believe, so make sure you do it, and you can draft alongside with me. I've been doing live streams. You guys can join and draft with me and potentially win a lot of money. But let me give you some strategy when we're talking about Drafters Fantasy Sports, because I want to help you guys win some money too. So first off, like I told you guys, they only put 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, 1 goalie, and 2 flex into the rostered positions every night. And there's no right wing, left wing, or center. It's only forwards, right? So that is something to consider, right? On these other platforms, positional scarcity matters, dual positions. This is not the case on Drafters. Another thing to consider is the scoring settings on Drafters. Like I told you guys earlier on in this video, league settings mean everything. So let me break it down. You can see here, goals are 3, assists are 2, power play points are 0.5, shorthanded goals are 2, shots on goal is 0.3, block shots are 0.3, and overtime goals is 1. The one notable thing is that there's no hits in these leagues, right? So guys like Evander Kane, Vincent Trocheck, Tom Wilson, the list goes on. They are not that valuable in these type of leagues. Definitely keep that in mind when you're drafting, because Evander Kane's ADP on this platform is way too high. Another great thing about Drafters is you can see the average fantasy points per game according to these settings when you go to draft. So you're going to understand the value of each player, but even still, like, there's still players that don't make a lot of sense when you're looking at their ADP. Like, let me give you one example. Let's compare Artemi Panarin versus Jeff Skinner, right? I know some people think that Jeff Skinner is going to regress and the Sabres are also going to regress, but Jeff Skinner averaged more fantasy points per game last year than Panarin according to these settings, and yet is going 50 picks later in drafts. So basically, you're able to identify which players are undervalued simply by looking at average fantasy points per game. So that's pretty much a strategy that I would suggest. So that's one obvious strategy, but this extends to understanding the value of positions. I told you guys about Artemi Panarin and Jeff Skinner and how they're really not that far off in value. If I can find those late round steals at forward, I'm going to pivot to defensemen in those early rounds. After the first 6 or 7 defensemen, there's a huge drop off in average fantasy points per game from last season. So I'm going to get those top tier defensemen in my early rounds and steal those forwards in the later rounds. I've done 16 drafts so far, and I've implemented this strategy in every single one of my drafts. I love getting those top tier defensemen early. I like getting good goalies early as well, because I can get those late round steals. Another thing to consider in drafters is that in best ball, it takes your highest scoring players, and every night you can only roster 3 forwards, right? It does it automatically, but you want to find guys that have huge nights, right? They don't have to be the most consistent players, but you want to find those players that are going to have 3 or 4 point nights, because that's going to help you a lot in the long run versus guys that get an assist every game, right? That's not going to help you. I think that sums up my initial strategy when talking about Drafters Fantasy Sports. This is a new type of fantasy hockey draft, like I said, so I'm learning along the way, as you guys are as well. These drafts are a lot of fun, guys, so make sure you sign up using my referral code, deposit using my promo code. It's a great deal, and I promise you're going to have a lot of fun doing these drafts. I touched on this a little bit in these prior sections, but I want to dedicate a full section to this because I do think it's very important. So let's talk about number 1, positional scarcity, right? We know defensemen and goalies are more scarce positions than forwards, but depending on your platform, you also might have right wing being a very scarce position. Specifically, this is the case on Yahoo. On Yahoo, you have to start 2 right wingers every night. So if you wait until the later rounds to grab those right wing players, that might cost you in your fantasy hockey leagues. If we're talking about dual eligibility as well, there's also going to be situations on a heavy night like Saturday where you want to start a player over another player, but you can't put them in because they only have 1 single designation and they just don't fit. So players with dual eligibility are very useful. And if we're looking at centers, that's usually the deepest position in drafts. You may want to fade centers in the first couple of rounds and get them later because you can get some pretty good steals. Now, no matter what platform you're on, defensemen and goalies are worth more than forwards, right? There's only so many top tier goalies, so many top tier defensemen, and that is something that you're going to want to take into consideration when drafting. On Fantrax, the ADP is more reliable, so is Drafters Fantasy Sports, but if you're looking at Yahoo, there is some insane ADPs for defensemen and goaltenders. So what you're going to be able to do on Yahoo is get elite goaltenders and elite defensemen. Obviously, Makar goes pretty high everywhere, but on Yahoo, Yossi goes pretty late, Rasmus Dahlin, Dougie Hamilton, Miro Heiskanen. Some of these ADPs are wild, so you might want to prioritize getting these top tier defensemen and then getting those forward steals at the later rounds, because it's much harder to get elite defensemen than it is elite forwards. Like, you can find some great forwards on the waiver wire throughout the season as well, not so much defensemen. I would prefer to have elite defensemen because you got to start 4 defensemen every night. If you decide to neglect the defenseman position, it is going to cost you in your fantasy hockey drafts. I'm telling you guys right now, I've seen it year after year. People's defensemen are trash and they lose. That's just how it is. With all that being said, guys, the key to winning your fantasy hockey leagues is drafting players with value, right? Whether this is value at ADP, meaning drafting guys that are undervalued and avoiding guys that are overvalued, or whether it means value according to positions. Understanding that you can get some steals in the later rounds at the forward position and stack up your defensemen and goaltenders, that is how you're going to win your fantasy hockey draft. You're going to have to understand your league settings and which players have an edge against others. You're going to have to understand how your league mates are going to draft by looking at the ADP on your platforms. If you have a guy that you're targeting that you know is undervalued, you might not want to grab him in the 5th round when you can get him in the 10th. You have to gauge when you should target certain players. There is a lot of strategy that goes into fantasy hockey, and I hope that this video helped you today. So click the like button below if you enjoy the video, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, and guys, I will be live streaming tonight around 7 or 8 p.m. You can come draft with me on Drafters Fantasy Sports, or you can just come hang out in the live stream. I will see you guys there.